10 minutes. That's how long it took after the judge finalized our divorce for my mother-in-law to whisk my ex-husband's mistress off to buy a $1.5 million condo on Park Avenue. As my ex-husband, Jackson, swiped his credit card to pay, the salesman's polite smile faltered. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "All 8 of your cards have been declined." I was still holding the warm divorce certificate. The paper smelled of fresh ink from the printer, but my heart felt as cold as a morgue slab, a chill that had settled deep in my bones after years of a slow-burning fever. Just 10 minutes earlier, in a sterile courtroom in downtown Manhattan, Jackson and I had stood side by side, our signatures ending 5 years of marriage. Now, 10 minutes later, I was standing on the courthouse steps. The midday New York sun glinted off the chrome of passing yellow cabs, so bright it made my eyes ache. Jackson stood beside me, his head bowed, unable to meet my gaze. It was strange, but I didn't cry. Maybe it was because I'd already shed all my tears during the marriage, silent sobs into my pillow on the countless nights he never came home. Those nights I'd sit in our kitchen, staring at a pot of his favorite chili growing cold, listening to the wail of sirens on the street below, praying each one wasn't a car bringing him back too early from wherever he was. Those nights I'd choked back tears, wondering what I had done wrong, only to wake up the next morning and force a smile, still saying, "Isabel, I'm here if you need anything." Still saying, "Honey, I saved you a plate." Jackson stood beside me, clutching his designer wallet so tightly his knuckles were white, as if he was afraid of losing something. His face was a mess of emotions, flushing red then turning pale, like a man who'd just sprinted for his life. I knew he wanted to say something, an apology, even just a single word, one final, clean break before we went our separate ways. Maybe a pathetic excuse like, "Anna, please don't make a scene." But he remained silent, just as he had for the past year when I'd asked about the cryptic text messages, about the money mysteriously draining from our business account, about why his phone was always turned off when he came home late. The blare of a car horn sliced through the tense silence. I didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. My mother-in-law, Isabel, a gleaming black Mercedes pulled up to the curb with an aggressive jerk. The door flew open and Isabel emerged, her sharp heels clicking against the pavement like tiny gunshots. She wore a silk blouse and a thick gold chain that screamed new money. Her makeup was flawless, her hair perfectly coiffed, as if she were heading to a gala, not picking up her newly divorced son. She didn't spare me a single glance. She marched straight to Jackson, grabbing his arm, her voice as sharp and thin as a razor blade. "Is it signed? Good. Divorcing her is the right move. Why stay with a woman who's nothing but dead weight, with a face that looks like she's perpetually sucking on a lemon, just taking up space?" Jackson gently tried to pull his arm away. He mumbled, "Mom, keep your voice down." Isabel shot him a look that could curdle milk. "Down? I want the whole world to hear it. I want everyone to know my son is finally free from the burden of a barren woman who thinks she's the queen of the castle just because she can balance a checkbook." My chest tightened. I knew she always threw my inability to have children in my face. What she didn't know, or pretended not to know, was that 3 years earlier, Jackson had forced me to have an abortion. I can still feel the cold of that clinic, my fingers gripping my sleeves while he stood in the hallway, his voice a chilling whisper. "Don't be selfish, Anna. A baby right now would be a disaster. Do you want our child to grow up watching me stressed out, with my mother breathing down my neck and the business on the verge of collapse?" I believed him. I was a fool. I blamed myself and endured the physical and emotional pain to do what he asked. And from that day on, I carried the label of the woman who couldn't conceive. Isabel finally turned to me, a sneer twisting her perfectly painted lips. "From now on, don't you dare try to cling to him. As a businesswoman myself, I know my son needs to be married to a sensible woman, someone who knows how to present herself, not some glorified accountant who spends all day buried in ledgers like a man." I looked at Jackson. He avoided my eyes, terrified of the truth. Suddenly, it all seemed horribly funny. Why had I spent all day buried in ledgers? To turn a company that started in a cramped, rented office into a respectable firm? To land every contract? To attend every networking event? to stay up all night drafting business plans so that Jackson could stand here today, on this street, with a fat wallet and a straight back. And now, I was the dead weight. Isabel pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and put it on speaker. Her voice instantly transformed, dripping with saccharine sweetness. "Mia, honey, it's me. Are you ready? Jackson and I are on our way. We're going to see the condo, okay? The new place is gorgeous." On the other end of the line, a girl's voice, soft as candy floss, replied, "Oh, Isabel, I'm so nervous. I can't wait to see it. Is it really for us?" Isabel let out a booming laugh. "Who else would it be for? $1.5 million paid in cash so you can have the life you deserve. The new daughter-in-law of this family has to live somewhere respectable. $1.5 million. The number hit me, and my heart didn't just sink, it plummeted. Not with shock, but with a bitterness that coated my tongue. How much of my sweat was in that $1.5 million? How much of the money from the company I co-owned, whose incorporation papers I'd signed, whose loans I'd personally guaranteed? How many nights had I skipped buying a new blouse so we could make payroll and protect our reputation? Jackson, standing next to Isabel, forced a smile. "Yeah, we're on our way now." Isabel shot me one last look, as if brushing away a piece of lint. "You hear that? My son is getting $1.5 million home. Go wherever you want, but don't let me see your face again." The car door slammed shut, the tinted window rising like a final curtain. I watched them drive away, not screaming, not begging. I just felt a vast, hollow emptiness inside me. In my hand, the divorce certificate had curled slightly from the force of my grip, my fingernails leaving crescent marks in the paper. The wind on the courthouse steps blew, carrying the city's scent of hot asphalt and exhaust fumes. I stood still for a few seconds, then pulled out my phone and called Ava, my best friend since college, the one person who'd witnessed every ounce of work I'd poured into my husband and my home. Ava answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. "It's done," I said, my voice flat. "It's done. And? Did that witch say anything to you?" I looked in the direction the Mercedes had disappeared. A small, cold curve formed on my lips. It wasn't a smile of joy, but something as chilling as the rim of a forgotten coffee cup. "Isabel is taking Mia to buy a $1.5 million condo. Jackson's paying." There was a stunned silence on the other end, then Ava exploded. "Oh my God, the audacity." I spoke slowly, articulating each word with precision. "Ava, our show is about to start." Ava's voice dropped to a whisper. "Anna, what are you going to do?" I didn't explain. I just gave the order I had been rehearsing in my head for months. "Ava," text Vincent, "tell him to do exactly what we planned. Lock everything down. Everything." I heard Ava take a sharp breath. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I replied. I hung up, hailed a yellow cab, and gave the driver the address of the real estate developer's sales office on Park Avenue. During the ride, the city was a chaotic blur of motion and noise. People were honking, laughing, living their lives. Only I, sitting in the back seat, saw my own reflection in the window, a face without tears, but with eyes that looked like they were covered in a thin layer of frost. I told myself, "Anna, you were too good, too patient, and that's why they thought you couldn't feel pain. Today, you don't need to make a scene. You just need to make things right." The cab pulled up in front of the sales office. Inside, chandeliers glittered, marble floors shone, and soft jazz music drifted through the air. I walked in, took off my sunglasses, smoothed my hair, and headed straight for the client lounge. I chose a discreet corner with a clear view of the closing desk. There stood Isabel, her back ramrod straight, acting like she owned the place. Mia, in a white sundress, clung to her arm, her face glowing. Jackson stood behind them, holding a few shopping bags, a strained smile plastered on his face as he tried to look generous. I ordered a hot latte and sat down to wait. I waited for the exact moment they reached the peak of their euphoria. And then, the salesman brought over the credit card machine. Jackson pulled out the first card, offering it up like a trophy. I put down my cup, resting my palm flat on the cool tabletop, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of my own heart. I knew that in just a few minutes, all that arrogance would shatter on the floor like a champagne flute dropped from a great height. I sat quietly in my corner, my hands resting on the cool, unyielding surface of the marble table. The latte in front of me was still steaming, its familiar aroma the same one I used to brew every morning back when I was still Jackson's wife, back when I still believed that if I just tried hard enough, our fractured family could find some semblance of peace. Now, that comforting scent only served as a reminder of how foolish I'd been. Across the room, Isabel stood before the sales contract, her voice booming, easily drowning out the soft jazz playing in the background. She pointed a manicured finger at the largest penthouse model in the center of the display. "This one," she declared to the salesman as if giving a royal decree. "The best one. Draw up the papers now. I'm buying it for my new daughter-in-law." Money is no object. Mia stood beside her, clinging to her arm. Her carefully made-up face was radiant with a victory she made no effort to hide. She tilted her head to look at Jackson, her voice so sweet it was sickening. "Honey, hurry up. I want to see the model unit already. I just adore the balcony overlooking the park. We can have our morning coffee out there." Jackson smiled. It was the same smile that had once melted my heart, the one that now just looked cheap and rehearsed. He set the shopping bags on the floor and pulled out his wallet with the decisive flourish of a man at the peak of his success. "Don't you worry. You sign. I'll pay for it all right now. One transaction." The salesman nodded eagerly and slid the credit card machine toward him. I watched Jackson's hand as he held the black Amex card. It trembled, just slightly, but I noticed. I had lived with him for 5 years. I had seen that same hand tremble the first time he signed a major contract, the first time we applied for a business loan, the first time the company was so tight on cash we couldn't make payroll. The only difference was, back then, the person sitting beside him, steadying his nerves, was me. Isabel crossed her arms, scanned the room, and said deliberately loudly, "A $1.5 million condo, paid for with a single swipe. My son has been in business for years. He's not short on cash." Mia giggled, her eyes flicking in my direction. She saw me. I know she did. But she pretended I wasn't there, as if I were just some stranger who had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. The credit card machine beeped. The salesman glanced at the screen, and his practiced smile froze. He typed something again, then said politely, "Sir, may I try the card again? The system is showing the transaction couldn't be completed." Jackson looked momentarily flustered, then forced a laugh. "Must be a glitch with your machine. Try it again." The salesman obliged. The second time, the beep was sharper, more final. Red text flashed on the screen. He leaned in slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. Your card is being declined." The atmosphere around the closing desk suddenly grew tense. A few other clients nearby glanced over with mild curiosity. Isabel's brow furrowed, her voice sharpening. "Declined? What kind of garbage machine is this? Get another one." Jackson swallowed hard, pulling another card from his wallet and handing it over quickly, as if speed could prove the previous failure was a fluke. "Try this one." I took a slow sip of my latte. The bitter taste spread across my tongue. I could feel the steady beat of my heart. Not racing, not out of control. It was real. I had waited for this moment for so long, and yet, now that it was here, I was terrifyingly calm. The third attempt, and then the fourth. Each time, the machine emitted a short, cold beep. The salesman was starting to sweat. His voice dropped lower, but it was still loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm very sorry, sir. The system is reporting that all of these cards are currently frozen." "Frozen?" Isabel screeched, taking a step forward. "Frozen from what? My son has more than enough money." Jackson's face went white. He quickly pulled out his phone, furtively glancing at the screen. I saw the notification flash, just for an instant, a message from the bank about a court-ordered hold on his accounts. He quickly locked the screen, as if hiding the truth could make it disappear. Mia's smile had vanished. She clutched Isabel's hand, her voice starting to tremble. "Jackson, what's going on? Didn't you say the money was all set?" Jackson stammered. It is. It must be a mistake at the bank. Let me just call them and find out what's happening." Isabel turned on the salesman, her voice a piercing shriek. "Get your manager out here. I am buying a home, not begging for change. I don't need this kind of hassle." The salesman scurried off to find his manager. Around us, people had started whispering. I caught fragments of their conversations. "Wow, thought they were big shots buying a multi-million-dollar place, and they can't even pay. Something's not right here." I placed my coffee cup down and stood up, my heels making a distinct, sharp click with each step on the marble floor. I wasn't rushing. I walked slowly, deliberately, as if I were strolling through my own living room. Jackson looked up and saw me. His eyes widened in sheer terror, as if he'd seen a ghost. "Anna? What are you doing here?" Isabel whipped around, her eyes raking over me with that familiar, contemptuous glare. "Did you follow us here? Can't you leave us alone even after the divorce?" I stopped directly in front of the desk. My voice was quiet, even. "I just came to watch my former mother-in-law buy a new condo for her new daughter-in-law." Mia bit her lip, shrinking behind Isabel. Her earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by a doe-eyed panic. I looked at her and almost laughed. This woman, for a married man and a few empty promises, had truly believed she had the world in her hands. The manager appeared, bowing slightly, his voice polite but firm. "Ma'am, sir, our bank has just confirmed that all cards registered to Mr. Jackson are currently under a court-ordered asset freeze. The transaction cannot proceed." "Asset freeze? On what grounds?" Isabel yelled. "By what right?" I spoke softly, not too loud, not too quiet, but with perfect clarity. "Because they're tied to the joint business account, Isabel." All three of them spun toward me in unison. Jackson took half a step back, his voice trembling. "Anna, what are you talking about?" I looked him directly in the eye for the first time in what felt like years. "What am I talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about. The company is in both our names. The accounts are joint. The money belongs to both of us. You withdrew it on your own. You transferred it on your own. You used it on your own. Now, the bank is simply doing its job." Isabel's eyes bulged. "You're lying." "My son earned that money. What does it have to do with you?" I smiled. It was a smile that held none of the weak, placating daughter-in-law from before. "Have you forgotten, Isabel? The day the company was founded, who filed all the paperwork? Who landed the first major contract? Who was the personal guarantor when we took out our first business loan? You might not remember, but the bank certainly does." Mia finally burst into tears, mascara running down her cheeks. "Jackson, say something." "I don't want the condo anymore. Let's just go." Jackson looked from Mia to Isabel, then to me. His face was as pale as a sheet of paper. "Anna, if there's something to discuss, let's talk at home. Don't make a scene here." I shook my head slowly. "I'm not making a scene, Jackson. I'm just taking back what is rightfully mine." Isabel lunged toward me, pointing a finger in my face. "An ex-daughter-in-law dares to raise her voice to her mother-in-law? Did I not feed you and put you through school?" I took a deep breath, my voice growing colder. "You never fed me for a single day. I started working the day I graduated. I brought money into this family to support it, not to be humiliated by you in front of strangers today." The silence in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The manager cleared his throat discreetly. "If you are unable to complete the payment, we will have to temporarily suspend the transaction." Isabel seemed to deflate for a moment, but she tried to hold herself together. "Fine. We don't want to buy it anyway. What a bizarre way to do business." She grabbed Mia's arm and turned to Jackson. "Let's go. I don't believe for a second that the money is gone." Jackson gave me one last pleading look. I turned away, refusing to meet his eyes. I had looked at him for 5 years. That was more than enough. As they passed me, Mia paused for a second and looked at me, her voice choked with sobs. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't know," I replied softly. "Whether you knew or not, it doesn't matter anymore." They left in a flurry of chaos. I stood there, feeling as though a massive stone that had been pressing on my chest for years had finally been lifted. My phone vibrated. It was a text from Ava. "It's done. Vincent says everything is locked down according to procedure." I typed back, "Thank you." I walked back to my table and finished the now cold latte. The bitter taste wasn't so overwhelming anymore. It was fading, just like the memories I was finally learning to let go of. Outside, the afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, strangely bright. I knew this was only the beginning. They left behind a silence so profound I could hear the frantic drumming of my own heart. The marble floor was still gleaming, the chandeliers still dripped with light, but the air of triumphant celebration had popped like a soap bubble. I stood alone in front of the closing desk, my mind a clean, quiet slate. Not with regret, but with a stark clarity. From this moment on, I was no longer Isabel's daughter-in-law or Jackson's wife. I was just Anna, a woman standing on her own 2 feet. The manager approached me, his voice soft. "Is there anything else you need, ma'am?" I shook my head and offered a polite smile. This smile wasn't for him or anyone else, it was for me. I turned and walked out. The late afternoon light hit my face, warm but not harsh. I felt, for the first time in years, like I could truly breathe. Just as I reached the curb, my phone rang again. It was Ava, I answered. Before I could say a word, she fired off a series of questions. "It's done? How did it go? Are they gone?" I answered concisely. They couldn't buy it. On the other end of the line, Ava let out a huge sigh of relief. So, everything went according to plan. Vincent just confirmed the bank has executed the freeze on all of Jackson's personal accounts, including the ones Isabel had her name on. I stood still for a second. Even though I was prepared for this, hearing it confirmed sent a small, sharp pang through my heart. After all, these were the people I once called husband and mother. But the feeling was fleeting, gone as quickly as it came. I understood that if I had shown any weakness today, the one backed into a corner would have been me. "And the company?" I asked. "The lawyer says the official notice goes out tomorrow. Since it's a joint account with clear evidence of irregular and massive withdrawals, the bank is fully cooperating." Vincent said, "Jackson is going to have a very hard time explaining this away," Ava replied. I hung up, stood for another moment, and then hailed a cab to go home. On the ride, watching the relentless flow of city traffic, I thought about my 5 years of marriage. It wasn't all tears. There were nights we sat and had dinner together, talking about work, dreaming about the future. But it was my own tolerance, my endless patience, that had allowed Jackson to believe he had no boundaries. I was so forgiving that I forgot to have limits for myself. When I got home, before I could even take off my shoes, my phone rang again. This time, it was Jackson's number. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Anna." His voice was hoarse, a world away from the confident man at the courthouse that morning. "Are you home?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "Can we please meet and talk? My mother and I, we're in a terrible state," Jackson said quickly, as if afraid I'd hang up. I remained silent. I could picture it perfectly. Isabel screaming, Mia sobbing, and Jackson scrambling, calling everyone he knew for help. The image didn't bring me satisfaction, only a profound sense of exhaustion. "If you have something to say it over the phone," I said. Jackson hesitated. "Anna, I know I was wrong, but we were husband and wife. What you've done, my mother won't be able to handle it." A small, humorless smile touched my lips, one that no one could see. "Jackson, when your mother was insulting me on the courthouse steps, did you stop to think if I could handle it?" Jackson was speechless. I continued slowly. "When you were draining money from our company, when you were hiding the fact that you were buying a condo for Mia, did you ever stop to think that was our shared money from our marriage? I was just borrowing it. I was going to pay it back," Jackson said weakly. "Borrowing it without asking the co-owner?" I retorted. "You've been in business for years. You know that's not just unethical, Jackson. It's illegal." He sighed, his voice trembling. "Anna, I am begging you. Can't you just be a little flexible? I'll sign anything, a promissory note, whatever it takes to pay it back." I looked at the wall opposite me, where our wedding portrait used to hang. I'd taken it down months ago, but the nail was still there, a tiny, dark hole. I reached out and touched it, a cold spot on the plaster. "Jackson," I said, "if I hadn't gone this far today, I would have lost everything. I'm not getting revenge on you. I'm protecting myself." He gasped. "So you're just going to corner me? Ruin me?" You cornered yourself a long time ago, I replied, and I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking slightly, but my heart felt lighter. Some conversations, if you let them go on too long, just drain the strength right out of you. I refused to be drawn back into that vortex. That evening, I went to Ava's apartment. She made a bowl of hot tomato soup and set it in front of me, just like she used to in college whenever I was overwhelmed. Eat, Ava said. Today is a new beginning. I ate slowly, one spoonful at a time. Ava, I'm not as happy as I thought I'd be. Ava nodded, her expression serious. Because you loved him once. But Anna, letting go isn't the same as losing. I looked up at my friend, my eyes welling up for the first time that day. What I'm most afraid of, I whispered, is that this will turn me into a cold person. Ava gave me a sad smile. Being cold to people who hurt you doesn't make you a bad person. You're still Anna. You're just an Anna who finally knows how to protect herself. I got home close to midnight, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. Old memories flickered through my mind, but they no longer had the power to suffocate me. I drifted off to sleep without realizing it. The next morning, I was woken by the insistent buzzing of my apartment intercom. I opened the door to find Isabel standing there, her hair a mess, her eyes red and puffy. The arrogance of yesterday was completely gone. "Anna," she called out, her voice raspy. "Let me come in and talk." I stood my ground, blocking the doorway. "If you have something to say, you can say it right here." Isabel choked back a sob. "I know I was harsh yesterday, but you can't do this to Jackson. He's my son." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in a long time. The lines on her face were deep, her eyes a chaotic mix of anger and fear. I took a deep breath. "I understand that you love your son, but I am also my parents' daughter. I cannot destroy myself just to accommodate your love for him." Isabel burst into tears. "If something happens to Jackson, how will I go on?" I was silent for a moment. Then I said, "You once asked me if I could handle it. Today, I'm asking you. If I hadn't defended myself, who would have handled it for me?" Isabel stared at me, as if seeing for the first time that I was no longer the submissive daughter-in-law of her memory. She turned, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'm leaving." I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a long sigh. I didn't feel like I had won. I just felt like a chapter of my life had finally, irrevocably, turned. My phone vibrated. A text from my lawyer, Vincent. "File is complete. The bank and the authorities will be meeting with Mr. Jackson directly tomorrow." I read it and put the phone down. Outside, the morning sun was rising. I made myself a new cup of coffee, black this time. The pure, bitter taste filled my mouth, but it felt right. I knew the road ahead was still long. This business with Jackson, Isabel, and Mia wasn't over. But at least I had crossed the first threshold, the threshold of my own fear. I walked to the window, watched the city wake up, and told myself silently, "Anna, from now on, you don't need to ask anyone for mercy." The next morning, I arrived at the company earlier than usual. The office was still quiet, with only the receptionist wiping down the front desk. When she saw me, she straightened up. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller. Miss Hayes." I gave her a small, genuine smile. This smile wasn't forced, like the ones I'd worn for months to hide the cracks in my foundation. I walked into my office, closed the door, and sat down. On my desk was the same stack of files I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Contracts I had stayed up all night proofreading, business plans I had mapped out with Jackson back when we both believed that just sticking together was enough. I ran my hand over the thickest file, a faint ache in my chest. But this time, the pain didn't spread. It was just an old scar, a reminder of the price I had paid for my trust. My office phone rang. It was Vincent. I picked up. "Miss Hayes, the bank has sent over the official statement. They are requesting a meeting with you and Mr. Jackson this afternoon. A lawyer from our firm will accompany you." "Okay," I replied. "Thank you for letting me know." I hung up, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes for a moment. I wasn't afraid of the meeting. I was just tired. It was the weariness of someone who had been holding their breath for far too long. But I also knew that to truly close a chapter, you have to read the very last page. Around noon, Jackson called. I stared at his name on the screen for a beat before answering. Anna, are you coming to the bank this afternoon? His voice was much flatter than usual, stripped of its usual charm. I'll be there, I said. My lawyer will be there as well. On the other end of the line, Jackson was silent for a few seconds before he replied, I know. The meeting was held in a private conference room at the bank. The bank's representative, my lawyer, Jackson, and I sat across from each other at a long, polished table. Jackson was visibly thinner. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his expensive suit wasn't perfectly pressed. He didn't look at me, keeping his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. When the bank representative began the presentation, detailing the irregular transactions, each figure flashed up on a large screen. I could hear Jackson's breathing become shallow and ragged. My lawyer turned to me. Miss Hayes, according to these records, this sum of money was withdrawn and transferred without your consent. Do you have a formal request? I looked at Jackson. His head was still bowed. I spoke slowly and clearly. I am requesting the full restitution of the amount that corresponds to my legal share, in accordance with the law. Jackson's head snapped up, his eyes red-rimmed. Anna, I didn't look back at him. I addressed the bank representative. I don't wish to prolong this. Please proceed according to protocol. The meeting ended after more than 2 hours. As we all stood up, Jackson followed me out into the hallway. The corridor was empty, the white fluorescent lighting cold and unforgiving. Anna, I'm begging you, Jackson said, his voice almost a whisper. Give me some time. I'll pay it all back. I stopped and turned to face him. Jackson, I've already given you more than enough time. I know, but I have nothing left right now. I let out a soft sigh, as if releasing something I'd been holding in for years. You still have your mother. You have your health. I, on the other hand, lost all of my trust. We all have to pay the price for our choices. I walked away first, without a single look back. This time, I knew for sure I wouldn't regret it. That evening, I went to my parents' house. The small house in Queens was exactly as I remembered it, the smell of dinner cooking, the familiar hum of the old air conditioner. My mother's face lit up when she saw me. Why are you home so early today? I hugged her, and the familiar warmth made my eyes sting with tears. I just missed home. My father came out of his study, looked at me for a moment, and asked, Is everything okay, sweetie? I nodded. I'm taking the steps I need to. Dinner was peaceful. My mother served me a piece of her roasted chicken. My father asked a few general questions about work. No one mentioned Jackson or Isabel. That silence wasn't heavy. It was a form of respect. I realized that some families show their love not by forcing you to relive your pain, but by giving you the quiet space to heal. Late that night, as I was getting ready to leave, my mother took my hand. Anna, whatever you do, don't let your heart turn to stone. I don't need you to win against anyone. I just need you to live in peace. I nodded. I know, Mom. Just as I got home, I received a text from Mia. I was a little surprised. The message was short. Miss Hayes, I would like to talk to you. I'm sorry for disrupting your life. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but then I typed back, Tomorrow, the coffee shop near your office. 10 a.m. The next day, Mia was already there when I arrived. She wasn't wearing the heavy makeup from before. She had on a simple dress, and her face was drawn and pale. When she saw me, she stood up and bowed her head slightly. Good morning, ma'am. I sat down and gave a small nod. Mia wrung her hands. Ma'am, I didn't know things would turn out like this. I thought Jackson was single. By the time I found out about you, it was too late. I looked at her, my voice calm. It was too late. But you're not innocent. Mia burst into tears, the sobs coming uncontrollably. I know. And now that Jackson has no money, his mother blames me for everything. I'm so scared. I listened quietly. Not out of pity, but because I wanted to understand. After a moment, I said, You're young. If you have any self-respect left, get out of their lives. Don't become the excuse for someone else's tragedy. Mia nodded, her voice choked. I'm leaving. I wanted to apologize to you. I stood up. I accept your apology. But remember, Saying sorry doesn't erase the consequences. When I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt lighter. Not because I had forgiven everything, but because I was no longer letting toxic relationships define me. That afternoon, Ava called. "Anna, Isabel is looking for you everywhere." I gave a weary smile. "Let her look. I heard she's trying to sell her house to help Jackson." I was silent. The image of Isabel, her face arrogant and proud that day, flashed in my mind. I didn't feel happy or sad. It was her choice. That night, I sat alone in my quiet apartment. I opened my laptop and started drafting a new business plan. Jackson's name was no longer on the cover page. It was just me, and a series of clear, coherent strategies. Outside the window, the city lights were coming on, one by one. I took a sip of hot tea and told myself silently, "Anna, you don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. Just keep moving forward." I knew the storm hadn't completely passed. The issues with Jackson and Isabel still had loose ends, but I also knew that I was finally strong enough to face them. The days that followed were slow but not quiet. I immersed myself in work, not as an escape, but as an act of reconstruction. The company began to restructure. The departments Jackson had once mismanaged now fell under my direct supervision, with help from my trusted senior manager, Victor. It wasn't easy, but at least there was clarity. I no longer had to wonder who was hiding what from me. One afternoon, as I was reviewing financial reports, Victor knocked on my office door and came in. "Anna," he said, his expression serious, "there's something I think you should know." I looked up. "Tell me." Victor lowered his voice. "The authorities have finished their initial investigation into Mr. Jackson. He's likely facing a significant fine and potentially criminal charges for embezzlement if he can't make full restitution within the court-mandated time frame." I nodded slightly. The news didn't surprise me. "And regarding Isabel Miller," Victor continued, "she's put her house on the market. It seems she's trying to secure a loan against it to cover part of Jackson's debt." I remained silent. The image of Isabel standing defiantly at my door that day flashed in my mind, her face a mask of fear beneath the rage. I felt no satisfaction, only the grim observation of a karmic circle slowly closing. That night, I received a call from my father, "Anna, I heard through some old business contacts that things are pretty chaotic over at your ex-husband's." "Yes, I know." My father sighed. "I'm not defending anyone, but remember to always leave yourself a way out. Don't let bitterness drag you down with them." I gripped the phone tighter. "I understand, Dad. I'm not bitter anymore. I'm just not going back." I hung up and sat by the window for a long time. The city at night was a symphony of distant sirens and headlights, but inside me, there was a profound silence. I realized that forgiveness didn't mean reverting to the person I was before. It meant refusing to let the past continue to dictate my present. A week later, a man I vaguely recognized was waiting in the reception area. It was Jackson's uncle, Lou. He was a quiet, dignified man who I'd only met a few times at holiday dinners. He always remained neutral when Isabel's voice rose in criticism. I had him shown into the small conference room. "Anna," he said, his voice weary as he stood up. "Hello, Uncle Lou." The title felt strangely natural, as if the chasm between our families had never opened. He sighed, lacing his hands together. "I haven't come here to blame you for anything. I see the situation for what it is." I waited for him to continue. "Jackson is in a complete mess," he said gravely. "Isabel has made herself sick with stress. Her blood pressure is through the roof." My heart gave a small, involuntary squeeze. It wasn't joy or alarm, just a deeply human reaction. "I'm telling you this only so you know the full picture." Uncle Lou looked at me directly. "I'm not here to ask you to drop the charges or go easy on him. I just want to ask, if it's within the legal possibilities, that you would agree to a structured payment plan for the remainder of the debt. He can't pay it all at once." I took a deep breath. I had anticipated this. "Uncle Lou, this is no longer a personal matter. I'm not trying to make things difficult, but I can't operate outside the legal framework." He nodded. "I understand that. I just worry he won't be able to handle the pressure." I looked out the window, then back at him. Uncle, if I hadn't stood up for myself that day, the one who wouldn't have been able to handle it would have been me. I handled it for a very long time. Uncle Lou was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he stood. I don't blame you. I just hope you can keep peace in your own heart. I will. I walked him to the door, my own heart heavy but not conflicted. A few days later, Isabel was waiting for me outside the office building as I left for the day. She didn't come to my home this time. She just stood there, by the revolving doors. She had lost a lot of weight. Her chic blonde hair now showed visible gray roots. "Anna," she called out, her voice tired. I walked over. "What do you need, Isabel?" She bowed her head, a gesture so uncharacteristic it stunned me. "I want to apologize." I stood perfectly still, not helping her up, not moving away. "I used to look down on you," she continued, her voice trembling. "I thought you were just some quiet, easily intimidated girl. It wasn't until everything fell apart that I realized you were the one holding it all together." Her words landed heavily in the space between us. "Why are you telling me this now?" Isabel looked up, her eyes red and raw. "I'm not asking you to forgive Jackson. I'm just hoping you won't hold a grudge against me." I was silent for a long time. Then I said, "I don't hold a grudge, but I can't ever be your daughter-in-law again." She nodded, tears finally rolling down her cheeks. "I understand. It was all my fault." We stood there, amidst the evening rush of people, without another word. Finally, Isabel turned and walked away, her back stooped with a defeat that seemed absolute. I watched her go, no anger left in my heart, only a deep sadness for a family that had, with its own hands, destroyed the good things it had. The following month, everything at work clicked into place. We landed our first major contract since the crisis. It was a huge win, a sign that we were truly back. Victor beamed. "Anna, we're finally back to normal." I smiled. "Yes, because this time we're walking on our own 2 feet." That night, I sat alone in my quiet apartment. I opened my laptop and started sketching out ideas for the company's future expansion. No longer was I just trying to keep things afloat, I was building. I realized with a sudden, breathtaking clarity that my strength hadn't been created in the fire of my divorce. It had always been there, buried under years of trying to be smaller, quieter, more agreeable. I wasn't a new person. I was just, finally, myself. The last legal tie was severed on a crisp autumn morning. The meeting to sign the final settlement agreement took place in a sterile conference room that smelled of old coffee and disinfectant. It was just Jackson, me, and our respective lawyers. There was no tension this time, no simmering rage. Jackson sat across from me, looking like a stranger in a suit that was now a size too big. When we were done signing, he laid his pen down and looked at me. "Anna, it's over." "Yes," I said. He nodded, a sad ghost of a smile on his face. "I don't expect anything. I just hope you live well." I stood up, my movements calm and deliberate. "I hope you learn to live as you should." We didn't shake hands. We didn't say another word. We simply walked out of the room and down separate hallways. As I stepped out of the building, a cool breeze hit my face. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching the city rush by. It was the first time since the divorce that I felt no connection to him, not legal, not financial, not emotional. It was a freedom so real it felt like I could taste it in the air. A few days later, Uncle Lou called. "Anna," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm just calling to let you know. Jackson is leaving New York. He's moving down south to start over." "Okay," I replied. "He asked me to tell you he's sorry, one last time." I was quiet for a moment. "Tell him the best apology is a changed life. I wish him peace." "Thank you, Anna. I hope you find the same." The call ended, and I put my phone down. I didn't feel relief or triumph. I just felt quiet. A final, definitive chapter had closed. With the past finally settled, I poured my energy into something new. I started a small, nonprofit community project, a resource hub for women navigating the financial and emotional complexities of divorce. I used my business skills to secure funding and my personal experience to shape the workshops. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclamation. One evening, during a support group session, A young woman, her eyes filled with fear, asked me, "Does it ever stop hurting?" I looked at her, and then at the other faces in the room, and I said, "The hurt changes. It stops being a wound and becomes a map. It shows you all the places you've been and reminds you of the strength you found to leave them behind." My story, the one filled with so much noise and pain, had found its quiet end. I had a job I was proud of, a family that loved me unconditionally, and a peace I had built with my own 2 hands. One night, I sat by my window, looking out at the glittering tapestry of the city. I opened my journal for the last time to write about this journey. The first pages were filled with anguish. The last ones were filled with calm. I wrote a final entry. There was a time I thought losing my marriage was losing everything. I now know that what I truly found was myself. I didn't win against anyone, and I didn't lose. I simply walked away at the right time. I closed the book and put it on a shelf. Outside, a gentle wind blew. I no longer feared the silence of my apartment, nor did I rush to fill it. I knew that if someone new were to walk into my life one day, they would meet a whole person, one who didn't need saving or pity, only respect. And if they didn't, I would be just fine. I was already whole. I turned off the light and lay down, a small, genuine smile on my face. This journey was over, but my life was just beginning. Not with a thunderous victory or a satisfying revenge, but with something far more profound, a woman who finally learned to stand on her own. If you are listening to this and see a piece of yourself in this story, I hope you hear this one thing. In life, enduring pain is not a measure of your love, and sacrifice is not a guarantee of respect. There are relationships that, the harder you cling to them, the more you lose yourself. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't how to fight back against betrayal, but how to never, ever hand your entire life over to someone else's keeping. Your peace is worth more than their approval. True happiness doesn't come from winning against someone else. It comes from the moment you dare to let go of what is hurting you. When you learn to respect yourself, life will inevitably treat you with more kindness. If this story meant something to you, if it stirred something within your own heart, I invite you to follow along for more stories like this one, stories of loss, of awakening, and of the quiet, resilient strength it takes to move forward. Thank you for listening. I wish you, no matter what storm you may be facing, the clarity to choose, the courage to let go, and the self-love to build a life you are proud of.